I never thought my marriage would end in an email. Not a conversation, not a knock on the bedroom door, not even an argument that got out of hand. An email. Cold. Typed. Sent while I was sitting on the edge of my bed, rubbing my stomach, trying to settle a baby who wouldn't stop kicking, almost like they already knew something I didn't. Let me ask you something before I go any further. Have you ever been so sure about someone that you didn't notice when they quietly stopped choosing you? Because that's how it started. Not with betrayal, not with cruelty, with silence.
I feel like this story will truly touch a woman's heart. It might feel very similar to your own story. Listen till the end, then tell me in the comments, were you right or was your partner wrong? If you enjoy real-life stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. Now, without wasting any time, let's start the story.
I was 47 years old when I found out I was pregnant. Yes, you heard that right. 47. I remember laughing when the doctor said it. A short laugh, the kind you do when your brain hasn't caught up with your body yet. I said, no, that's not possible. The doctor didn't laugh. She just turned the screen toward me, pointed, and said gently, "Well, there's your baby." I should have noticed then how my joy felt lonely, but I didn't. Because when you've spent years being the emotional backbone of a marriage, you get used to carrying good news by yourself. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 19 years. 19! That's not a starter marriage. That's not a we tried situation. That's shared holidays, shared losses, shared last names, shared bank accounts. At least that's what I thought. We met in our late 20s, built a life the slow way, worked, saved, bought furniture that took 2 paychecks to afford and a Saturday afternoon to argue over. From the outside, we looked solid, the kind of couple people pointed to and said, if they can make it, anybody can. And I believed that. I believed that longevity meant loyalty, that familiarity meant safety, that silence meant peace. Whew, listen to me now. Daniel wasn't a bad man. Let me say that clearly, because I know how people's minds work. He didn't hit me, didn't scream, didn't cheat, at least not that I ever proved. But he disappeared emotionally years before he ever left physically. And that kind of abandonment, it sneaks up on you. In the early years, Daniel talked a lot. He had opinions, stories, dreams, complaints about work, plans for retirement. Then, somewhere between year 10 and year 15, the conversations got shorter. Fine. Long day. We'll talk later. Later never came. But I told myself that was just marriage, because nobody prepares women for the quiet erosion. They warn you about infidelity. They warn you about abuse. They don't warn you about indifference. By the time I found out I was pregnant, Daniel had already perfected the art of being physically present and emotionally unavailable. He still slept in the bed, still ate dinner, still asked, "What's for food?" But he stopped asking about me. So when I told him about the baby, I watched his face carefully. I was expecting shock, maybe fear, maybe excitement. What I got was distance. He sat down slowly, rubbed his forehead, didn't touch me, didn't touch my stomach. After a long pause, he said, "Well, that's unexpected." Unexpected. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "How do you feel?" Not, "We'll figure this out." Just unexpected. I told myself he needed time, because women are excellent at excusing behavior that hurts them, especially when they're trying to protect the picture of the life they built. So I gave him time. Weeks passed. My body changed, my hormones surged, my emotions lived right under the surface. And Daniel? He retreated further. He stayed later at work, took longer showers, started sleeping on the far edge of the bed like I was contagious, and still, I said nothing, because silence had become our language. Here's the part that still stings when I think about it. I was the one checking on him. Are you okay? Do you want to talk? You've been quiet. And every time he'd say, I'm just tired. Aren't we always tired when we don't want to tell the truth? One afternoon, about 4 months into my pregnancy, I noticed something strange. I logged into our joint bank account, or tried to. The password didn't work. I tried again, still nothing. Now, before you jump ahead, no, I didn't panic right away. I thought maybe the bank updated something. Maybe the system was down. I called customer service. They asked me to verify my information. Then the woman on the phone said something that made my chest tighten. Ma'am, your name is no longer listed on that account. I laughed. A nervous laugh, the kind you do when reality hasn't settled yet. I said, That's impossible. That's my account. She paused. I'm sorry, ma'am. The account was closed 2 days ago. Closed 2 days ago, while I was home folding baby clothes. I didn't confront Daniel that night. I don't know why. Maybe part of me already knew something I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I went to bed early. And sometime around 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. An email notification. From Daniel. Subject line, Next Steps. No greeting, no we need to talk, no warning, just Next Steps. And before I opened it, I placed my hand on my stomach and whispered, Whatever this is, we'll get through it. I didn't know then how wrong I was. I stared at the screen for a long time before I opened the email. Long enough for my phone to dim, long enough for my hand to start shaking, long enough for the baby to kick again. Hard this time. Have you ever noticed how your body reacts before your mind does? My heart was already racing, like it had read the message ahead of me. The subject line still sat there, calm and professional. Next Steps. Like we were coworkers, like this was a project timeline, like my marriage was a task that needed closing out before the end of the quarter. I tapped the screen. The email wasn't long. That's the part that still gets me. 19 years of marriage, reduced to a few carefully worded paragraphs, spaced just enough to look considerate. He started with my name. Not honey. Not we need to talk. Just my name. Then he wrote, I've given this a lot of thought, and I believe it's best for both of us to move forward separately. Move forward separately? I remember thinking, forward to where? And since when were we not moving together? He went on, This isn't about blame. I just feel we've grown apart. Grown apart? That phrase gets used like a soft pillow to smother hard truths. No mention of the baby, no acknowledgement that I was carrying his child, no how are you holding up, just logistics. He explained that he had already spoken with an attorney, that papers would be filed within the week, that communication should be limited to essentials only. Essentials? Apparently, I was no longer essential. I read the email 3 times, then a 4th. Then I noticed the final paragraph. I've taken care of the financial separation to make things cleaner. Taken care of. Cleaner. That's when the bank account made sense. The password, the closed account, the money that had quietly disappeared while I was focused on prenatal vitamins and doctor appointments. I felt nauseous. And no, it wasn't morning sickness. I sat there in the dark, phone glowing, feeling like someone had unplugged me from my own life. No sound came out of my mouth. That surprised me. I thought I would scream, cry, throw something. Instead, I was quiet, still, like my soul had stepped out of the room. Let me pause here and ask you something. Why is it that when women are betrayed, we still look inward first? Because my immediate thought wasn't, how could he do this? It was, what did I miss? I replayed every conversation, every silence, every I'm tired. Every night he turned his back toward me in bed, and suddenly all those little moments lined up like evidence I'd ignored. I didn't wake him up. Daniel was sleeping peacefully in the other room because, yes, by then he had moved himself to the guest room without explanation. I didn't shake him, didn't confront him, didn't demand answers. I went into the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub. I pressed both hands against my stomach and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Not to him, to the baby. The next morning, Daniel acted normal. That's the word I still struggle with. He made coffee. He checked his phone. He asked if I wanted toast. Toast. Like he hadn't just detonated my life at 2:17 a.m. I watched him move around the kitchen like a stranger who knew where everything was. Finally, I said, "I got your email." He didn't look surprised. That hurt more than I expected. He just nodded and said, "I figured you would." No apology, no discomfort, no shame, just resignation. I asked him one question, just one. Why now? He sighed like I was asking him to explain a delayed flight. "This pregnancy made things clear," he said. Clear, as if clarity justified cruelty. He went on to say he didn't want to start over at his age, that he felt trapped by expectations, that he needed freedom. Freedom. From his wife, from his unborn child, from responsibility. Now, here's where the dark humor sneaks in, because sometimes laughter is the only thing that keeps you upright. I remember thinking, "Sir, you are 52 years old. What freedom are you looking for? Comfortable silence? Early bird specials?" That I didn't say that. I just nodded, because when you're blindsided, your brain takes time to catch up. The days that followed felt unreal. I went to prenatal appointments alone, sat in waiting rooms surrounded by couples holding hands. I'd smile politely while feeling like I was watching someone else's life. At night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. The same house, same walls, same furniture, but nothing felt like it belonged to me anymore. A week later, I met with a lawyer. I brought documents, bank statements, tax records. That's when I learned the full truth. Daniel hadn't just closed the joint account. He had transferred everything into a new account, one with only his name on it. Every dollar we saved together, every emergency fund, every future plan, gone. Legally murky, morally devastating. The lawyer looked at me gently and said, "We'll fight this." Fight. I was so tired already, but I nodded again because that's what women like me do. We keep nodding while the ground keeps moving. Here's what nobody tells you about betrayal at this stage of life. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels heavy, like carrying groceries with bags cutting into your fingers and you're too far from the car to put them down. You just keep going. Daniel moved out 2 weeks later. No goodbye, no final conversation, just boxes, a hired truck, a man who once promised forever, walking away from a pregnant wife without looking back. And still, I didn't cry. Not yet. The crying came later, when the house was quiet, when the baby kicked, when I realized something that made my chest ache in a new way. He hadn't told anyone, not his family, not our friends. To the world, he was just going through a transition. And I was the woman left to explain an absence I didn't create. But the real shock, the one that made my knees buckle, came 3 weeks after he left. It arrived in the mail, a thin envelope, official, with my name misspelled. Inside was something I never imagined I'd see while pregnant. And when I read it, I finally understood that the email was only the beginning. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for hours before I opened it. I noticed it the moment I walked in. Thin, beige, official looking. The kind of envelope that doesn't bring good news. My name was printed across the front. Misspelled. One letter off. After 19 years. That should have told me everything right there. But still, I opened it. Inside were copies of documents, bank transfers, account closures, a lease agreement. A lease dated 6 months earlier. 6 months. That meant while I was cooking dinners, folding laundry, planning holidays, Daniel had already secured a place to land. Before I even knew I was pregnant. Before he ever said a word. This wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. Have you ever had a moment where your stomach drops? Not from fear, but from understanding? That's what it felt like. Because suddenly, every memory rearranged itself. The emotional distance, the silence, the way he stopped including me in decisions. It wasn't confusion. It was preparation. I sat down at the table and let the papers spread out in front of me like a puzzle I didn't want to finish. There were emails between him and the bank, dates highlighted, language that was calm, deliberate, professional. No emotion. He was already detaching, financially, legally, emotionally, while still coming home every night, still eating my food, still sleeping under the same roof, still letting me believe we were intact. Let me say something that might land heavy. Sometimes emotional neglect isn't absence, it's concealment. And that realization hurt more than the divorce itself. I thought about the pregnancy announcement, how quiet he'd been, how quickly he retreated. It wasn't shock, it was interruption. The baby wasn't a surprise, it was an obstacle. And once I saw that truth, something inside me hardened. Not into bitterness, into clarity. I stopped asking, what did I do wrong, and started asking, how long had I been carrying this marriage alone? That question unlocked memories I'd buried, like the time I sat in the ER by myself with chest pains while he couldn't get off work, or the holidays I planned alone while he scrolled through his phone, or the way I'd learned to stop sharing my fears because he always seemed distracted. I didn't notice the pattern because I was busy maintaining peace. Here's the uncomfortable truth for many women my age. We confuse endurance with love. We think if we can survive silence, it must mean something. But silence that starves you is not peace. It's neglect with good manners. I didn't call Daniel after opening the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded the papers neatly and placed them back inside. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat alone and listened to myself. Not the voice that makes excuses, not the voice that keeps the family together, the quieter one, the honest one. and it said, "You were faithful to a man who had already left." The days after that were different. Still painful, but different. I stopped waiting for explanations, stopped replaying conversations, stopped hoping he'd suddenly wake up and realize what he'd done, because hope, when it's misplaced, becomes self-betrayal. I started documenting everything: dates, times, transactions. Not out of revenge, out of self-respect. There's a difference. My lawyer was impressed, not by the documents, by my calm. She said, "You're handling this remarkably well." I smiled. What I didn't say was this: when you've been emotionally alone for years, abandonment feels familiar. It's just finally honest. The baby grew, my body changed, and somewhere between the legal appointments and quiet dinners alone, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not from the pain, from the pretending. But the reckoning wasn't finished, because just when I thought I understood the depth of Daniel's departure, someone else reached out. Someone who wasn't supposed to know anything. And what they told me? That reframed the entire marriage.
This story might feel close to your own life. Please listen till the end and share your thoughts in the comments. For more real stories like this, consider subscribing.
The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember that because Tuesdays had become my hardest days. Not close enough to the weekend to feel relief, not far enough from Monday to feel productive. Just sitting in the middle of everything. My phone rang while I was standing at the sink, staring out the window, holding a glass I hadn't finished washing. I almost didn't answer. Something in me knew this call wouldn't be casual. "Hi," the woman said carefully. "This is Marlene, Daniel's sister." I hadn't heard her voice in weeks, not since before he moved out. I said her name slowly, like I was testing it. "Hi, Marlene." There was a pause, the kind where someone is deciding how much truth to release. Then she said, "I didn't know." Didn't know. 2 words that changed everything. She told me Daniel had shared a version of the story. A version. One where he was overwhelmed. One where the marriage had run its course. One where the pregnancy was framed as complicated. But what he didn't tell her? That he left by email. That he emptied the account. That he planned his exit months in advance. She found out accidentally. From paperwork. From timelines that didn't add up. From her own questions that he kept dodging. And eventually, from the truth. "Just want you to know," she said, "I don't agree with how he did this." How he did this. Not that he did it. How. That distinction matters because sometimes people will acknowledge harm only when it's impossible to ignore. I thanked her, not out of politeness, but because hearing someone else say it out loud cracked something open in me. For the first time, I wasn't the unreliable narrator. I wasn't the emotional wife. I wasn't the woman who must have missed something. Someone else saw it, named it, and didn't excuse it. After we hung up, I sat down slowly. I realized something then that still gives me chills. Daniel's power came from silence, from mine, from the fact that I protected his image even while he dismantled my life. And the moment that silence broke, so did the illusion. Let me ask you something honest. How many women stay quiet not because they're weak, but because they're loyal to people who've already abandoned them? Because I was still doing it, explaining his absence gently, using neutral language, saying, "We're just going through changes," as if changes covered cruelty. A few days later, I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, then concerned, then confused. She said, I heard you and Daniel separated, but I didn't realize you were pregnant. Pregnant. Out loud, in public, for the first time since the email. I nodded. Her face changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. That's when I understood something else. Truth doesn't need theatrics. It just needs daylight. Word travels slowly at first, then all at once. People started reaching out, not with gossip, with questions, and I answered them simply, not angrily, not defensively, just honestly. He left by email. He moved the money. I'm pregnant. No commentary, just facts. And the facts spoke louder than I ever could. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. He emailed again. This time the tone was different, softer, concerned. He said things like, I didn't intend for this to get misunderstood. Misunderstood, as if clarity was the problem. He asked if we could align narratives. Align. That word told me everything. I didn't respond right away. I was learning something new about myself, that I didn't owe him emotional labor anymore, that clarity didn't require consensus, that my healing wasn't a group project. The pregnancy progressed. My belly rounded. Strangers smiled at me in line at the pharmacy. Life kept moving, and Daniel began to feel the absence, not of the marriage, of control. He missed appointments, forgot deadlines, asked questions he already knew the answers to. It was subtle, but real, because men like Daniel don't regret leaving, they regret losing access. One evening, as I sorted baby clothes alone, my phone buzzed again. Another email, shorter this time. He wrote, I didn't think it would be this hard. Hard. Not wrong, not cruel, hard. I stared at the screen and felt something unexpected. Nothing. No anger, no hope, just distance. The same distance he once gave me. And that's when it hit me. The regret wasn't coming because he missed me. It was coming because he no longer controlled the story. And once that happens, everything shifts. But the real turning point, the one that sealed it, came weeks later, at the courthouse, on a day I thought was purely procedural. I walked in expecting paperwork. What I didn't expect was to see the truth finally catch up with him. The courthouse smelled like old paper and tired patience. If you've ever been in one, you know that smell. It's not dramatic, not intimidating, just heavy, like generations of unfinished conversations lingering in the air. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't want to rush. For once, I wanted to enter something prepared. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late. That alone told me things were changing. This was a man who never missed meetings, never arrived unprepared. But that morning, his suit looked slightly rumpled, his expression uncertain, and for the first time since the email, he looked at me. Really looked, as if noticing me anew. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We sat on opposite sides of the room like strangers who shared a long memory neither of us wanted to revisit. The baby kicked. I smiled despite myself. Life, it turns out, has a sense of timing. The judge was efficient. No speeches, no sympathy, just facts, dates, accounts, transfers. And as the financial details unfolded, I watched Daniel's posture change, shoulders tightening, jaw clenching, because this wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about records. And records don't care about narratives. The judge asked a simple question. Why was the joint account closed without mutual consent? Daniel answered carefully, too carefully. He spoke about clean separation, reducing conflict, efficiency. The judge didn't interrupt, just listened, then asked another question. And why was this done while your wife was pregnant? Silence. The room shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. Daniel cleared his throat. I didn't think... The judge raised a hand. I'm not asking what you thought, she said evenly. I'm asking what you did. That distinction landed like a gavel inside my chest. For the first time since this began, someone in authority was saying what I hadn't had the energy to articulate. Intent doesn't erase impact. Planning doesn't excuse harm, and pregnancy changes everything. The ruling wasn't final that day, but something important happened. Temporary orders were issued, funds were frozen, access restored, oversight established, accountability, not punishment, just balance. As we left the courtroom, Daniel lingered. I could feel it. He said my name, softly, like he used to. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. Yes, I said. I didn't expect it to go like this. There it was again. Expectation, as if fairness was a surprise. I turned then, looked at him fully, not with anger, with accuracy. It went exactly how it was supposed to, I said, and I meant it. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because something had shifted inside me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for explanations, not for apologies, not for closure from the person who caused the wound. Let me tell you something they don't prepare women for. Justice doesn't always feel victorious. Sometimes it just feels steady, like standing on solid ground after months of walking on loose gravel. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried again. Texts, emails, questions masked as concern. How are you feeling? Are you taking care of yourself? Let me know if you need anything. The timing would have been laughable if it hadn't been so revealing. He wanted back in, not to the marriage, to relevance. I responded politely, briefly, only when necessary, because boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. The pregnancy moved into its final stretch. I prepared the nursery, alone, chose colors, folded clothes, assembled a crib with instructions I pretended to understand. I laughed out loud at one point, standing in the middle of the room, holding a tiny sock. Life is strange like that. It keeps offering moments of tenderness, even after betrayal. Daniel missed the baby shower, not because he wasn't invited, because he didn't know where he fit, and that confusion, that was new for him. But the most unexpected moment came one quiet evening. Another email. Short. No subject line this time, just one sentence. I see now what I lost. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed my laptop, because regret that arrives late doesn't require response. And yet, something inside me softened, not toward him, toward myself, for surviving, for seeing clearly, for choosing peace over performance. I went into labor 2 weeks later, early, unexpected, but strong. And as I sat in that hospital room, breathing, grounding, focusing, I realized something profound. The email didn't end my life. It clarified it. Labor has a way of stripping life down to essentials. Breath, pain, focus. No room for performance, no space for pretense. Just truth moving through the body. I was alone in the delivery room when the contractions became real. Not dramatically alone. Nurses moved in and out, voices calm, practiced, but the kind of alone that settles in when there's no familiar hand to squeeze, no partner pacing the floor, no whispered reassurances. And yet, I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. As I breathed through the pain, something shifted inside me, not just physically, emotionally. I realized I wasn't abandoned in that room. I was arriving. The baby came just before dawn, the quietest hour of the night, when the world feels suspended between what was and what will be. When they placed my child on my chest, everything else receded. The emails, the courtrooms, the bank accounts, the explanations I never got, none of it mattered. This life did. I cried then, not from grief, from release, because something that had been heavy for years, long before the divorce, finally lifted. The weight of being emotionally unseen, the weight of trying to hold a marriage together alone. Daniel wasn't there. That wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence. He found out hours later, through family, not me. I heard later that he asked if he could come by. The nurse looked at me gently. I shook my head. Not out of spite, out of clarity. This moment didn't need complication. Let me say something carefully. Forgiveness doesn't require access, peace doesn't require proximity, and healing doesn't require the participation of the person who caused the wound. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new rhythm, feeding, rocking, learning my baby's sounds. Sleep came in fragments, but peace came whole. Daniel reached out again, more frequently now, messages filled with reflection. I should have handled things differently. I didn't realize what I was doing. I wish I could go back. Those words arrived too late to hurt and too late to matter, because regret that comes after the damage belongs to the one who caused it. Here's the part that stays with me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Time passed, the legal matters resolved, the finances corrected, not fully but fairly. Daniel moved on. So did I. But not in the same way. Years later, because yes, time keeps moving, someone asked me if I'd ever tell the story. I hesitated. Then I said yes, because silence protects the wrong lesson. So if you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, if you're in a marriage that's gone quiet in a way that feels lonely, if you've been carrying emotional weight by yourself and calling it strength, let me tell you this. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. It leaves quietly. And when it does, it's okay to stop waiting for it to come back. Daniel's regret arrived late. Mine didn't arrive at all, because I learned something invaluable. Being chosen matters. And when someone stops choosing you, believe them. This wasn't the ending I imagined, but it was the beginning I needed. Thank you for listening, and if this story touched something in you, don't ignore it. Your silence deserves to end too.
If you're still listening, it means this story touched you. Please subscribe. Your support truly matters.